Alright, today we'll be disassembling a Polaris Magnum 425 motor, and a lot of these motors are going to be the same between the 300, the 400, the 425, but this motor today that we're going to do is a Magnum 425. First thing we're going to do is pull the head cover. We're going to pull the head, the exhaust manifold, the intake manifold. We'll pull the camshaft, sprocket, recoil, starter. We'll pull the cylinder and the piston off, and then we will split the case. So we've got 5 8mm bolts on this cam sprocket cover here. We've got 8mm bolts on this head cover, and we've got that there. We've adjusted the valves, and we showed a video doing that. And we'll go ahead and take the manifold off. That's a 6mm Allen to remove these 2 Allen bolts here for the intake manifold. Now we've got the exhaust manifold on the other side, and that's going to be 2 13mm nuts holding that manifold on. So there's the intake manifold. This is a rubber boot here that will sometimes crack around this band here, around the head. That's just from heating and cooling, and that'll just possibly happen over time, and those boots will need to be replaced. So we've got the exhaust manifold here. Just two bolts or 2 nuts holding this on. I'm going to slide these nuts back on there. We've got your cam chain tensioner here, and we'll pull that before we go any farther as far as the head. That way we're not damaging any area there. We've got 8mm bolts holding that tensioner on. And you can pull that center bolt out of the tensioner, and you'll want to do that if you're going back together with the cam chain tensioner at some point, but this one we're not going to. And then you can just tap it, and that'll kind of break that seal free. There's a gasket there that'll cause it to hold up. So next we'll go ahead and pull the rockers, and that's just these 10mm bolts on top here. And do this in a crisscross pattern. And I like to find top dead center before I do that. That way we're not causing any tension on this, on the rocker arms, or on the valves. Just puts less pressure on those parts if we find top dead center to take the pressure off those valves. So we've got the rockers out there. We're going to keep these bolts with them. They're a specialty bolt that will center those. Now we've got your camshaft here. Inspect that for damage. We'll pull these head bolts. And they're a 12-point socket on these. They'll have to go grab. So we'll go ahead and pull the sprocket. We'll have to do that before we pull the head. There's 3 10mm bolts holding that on, and the top one, if you have it on top dead center, you'll have to spin it a little bit to get to it. Now we're able to pull that sprocket off. Now if we had not pulled that tensioner, there'd be a lot of pressure on this sprocket, and so we want to make sure that we pull this sprocket before we pull that head, or pull the tensioner before we pull that sprocket. Okay, we've got 2 10mm bolts on the side here, right underneath this cover, so we want to make sure we pull those off. These 10mm bolts here we'll keep with the sprocket, that way those don't get lost. Alright, we will grab a 12-point 14mm socket. right. And I don't have a 12 point. There we go there. We've got a 9/16, which is the same thing. And these are torqued on, so I'll make sure that we can pull these out. These are tight. All right, 4 of those bolts there. And they are all the same height. So now we are ready to pull. As long as you got that cam chain removed, we're ready to go ahead and pull that head. And it's aluminum, so again, just be careful where you tap, but a lot of times if you can put pressure going up, tap on it, you can break that seal. If not, you can grab a little pry bar and get to an area where you can get between 2 places, but you don't want to pry on that head and damage the gasket area. So we've got a guide here. We've got a guide here that we'll have to pull when we get down farther into that motor. Got 2 8mm bolts on the bottom of the cylinder here. So make sure those are pulled, and then we've got bolts clear down. Again, 12 point socket a little bit farther down there, and those are a 12mm. All right, now we've got your oil filter on this side, on this one here. So at some point we'll remove that oil filter. We also have coolant lines running down, but we want to. So we'll pull those coolant lines before we pull that cylinder. We've got coolant sitting down inside here. This is kind of where it cools. Coolant will be around here. If you've got a head gasket problem, a lot of times what that is on this particular gasket here, coolant will be leaking from the head into the cylinder, vice versa. You'll be running low on coolant. Eventually, you'll be hot. You'll be running hot, and that motor will be shot. We've got the hose off there. Again, find an area where we're not going to damage any area when we're prying on this, and just put a little bit of pressure up on it. If that motor's locked up, that piston and cylinder are locked up, this cylinder is going to be very difficult to get off. And that wasn't the case here. Now we've got an oil line too holding us up as well. So 2 oil lines go into this oil filter area that we'll need to pull before we pull that cylinder. 2 17mm. And our banjo bolts. And there is your cylinder there. And we've got just 4 small bolts holding that down, along with the 2 8mm bolts here. So we've got your cam chain. We have your piston here. And we'll go ahead and pull that piston now. And I'll flip it so you can see a little bit better. There's a circlip here that will need to be removed to pull that. On this style, you can use pliers. Most other manufacturers don't use this style of circlip. Makes it a whole lot easier to remove, but you just pull out. Set that back down, then push the piston pin out the opposite direction or the way that you pulled that pin, the side that you pulled that pin on. So this cylinder is, or this piston is stuck on there, which is maybe why we got the motor. So we're gonna go ahead and leave that. You can feel it's catching. So that's probably where it's damaged. That's probably really the only thing it needs, but that may be a crank problem. We'll go ahead and flip this motor up. We'll pull the recoil starter, we'll pull the magneto and the flywheel, and show you how to do that. So we've got the pull starter here, and this pull starter is in really good condition. A lot of times if these pull starters break on people, they'll just buy another one as opposed to fixing it. We've got 8mm bolts all the way around, and then this cover will come off. Here is your inspection cap here for adjusting valves. Again, put pressure on it. Tap on it, that'll just pop right off. Make sure that there's no bolts holding you up. There's some dowel pins on these that get stuck a lot of times, which is what happened there. So we've got your pull starter here. We've got some rust, but overall in good condition. We'll pull this flywheel. Here's your starter gear. And that's a one-way gear, and it's spring-loaded. So if you've got a bad starter drive, this may be stuck out, stuck in, may catch, but you want to be able to spin it and you want it to fall back into place. So this starter drive is good on this one. We've got your starter motor over here, and we'll go ahead and pull this flywheel. All right, looks like it's a 13/16. Or a 7/8. So it's a 7/8 socket. You'll grab a puller for it. And what I do is just spray a little bit of 2,4-D down in here while we're looking for the puller and the right parts to get on that, just to kind of help break that free. Now we've got a claw here that'll push right down onto the crank. And we've got the bolts here to tighten down. This will be magnetic, so you'll have some pull even if this is not tight on there, but this crankshaft is a tapered, so this flywheel, when you bolt it back on, will tighten itself onto the crank. And then there's also a keeper that'll allow that flywheel, that'll keep it from not spinning. That'll keep it from spinning. Make sure that it's going straight. So this one here, it looks like we need to tighten that one down a couple turns. That way your puller isn't shooting off to one side or the other. put some pressure on it. If it's not coming off right away, what I like to do a lot of times is just tap on it. Sometimes that'll break it free. In this case it did, so put some pressure on it. I leave my socket on there, that way you don't damage your puller, and just tap one good time on there. A lot of times that'll pop that off of there. So we've got the flywheel here. We'll remove the puller. You want to make sure you don't beat on the outside of this flywheel. A lot of times it'll break these weights loose. In this case, these weights are in great condition. We've got your stator here. We've got 10 millimeter bolts holding that stator on around the outside. There's your stator here. Again, if we use a crowbar, just make sure you don't damage any areas. And that should just pop right off of there. So there's your stator and your plate. If you buy this, a lot of times it'll just be the 3 Phillips bolts around the outside. And then you can see here now that we've got the cam chain on the bottom here. And then we've got the last guide that we'll pull. .12 millimeter. And that's a specialty bolt there. There's where your other guide sits. So you want to make sure that the area's not damaged. A lot of times that will sit under. A lot of times if you spin that motor with that cam chain, it'll damage that guide holder there. Just want to make sure that that's good. We'll go ahead and pull this water pump here. Got 8 millimeter bolt. To drain this water pump, you can just pull that 10 millimeter bolt when it's on the motor. There's your impeller cover here, and then we've got your impeller down here. Okay, 10 millimeter. And this could fling coolant all over, so just keep a rag right there to protect your everything. We'll pull that impeller off there. And then we are ready to split that case. I'm going to flip this up here, pull the starter, and then it'd be ideal if we could pull that piston right now. And we'll also pull these oil lines here. We've got, see these bolts are banjo bolts. They've got a hole down the center and then holes on either side here. And then they allow oil to flow through these lines, through these bolts. We've got the starter here. These are held in by a couple O-rings, or sealed. Got one O-ring here, and then this starter is good, but we'll test it. And the way we'll test it is just hook a small battery up to it. Ground one side, positive up on the other. You just want to briefly touch it. It'll spark, so be careful of that. It'll spin that starter. If that starter is good, it'll spin freely. You won't have any issues there. If it's snapped,